The fifth talk of the Lent term. Today we have two design fellows, Eric Martin and Nikolai Delvendahl, and they're going to talk to us today about the relationship between art and architecture in their practice. Eric is a graduate from the Western Institute of Technology in Guadalajara and at Madrid. He's also a guest critic at the Architectural Association and Kingston University. Nikolai is a graduate from the University of Stuttgart, and apart from teaching here, he's also taught at the London Met. He's also a current member of the Hackney Design Review panel. So the talk, as always, will be 45 to 50 minutes, followed by a 10 to 15 minute question session. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. You can come closer. It feels like we're very far away. I'm sorry you have to be here today. Such a nice day outside. Very warm. We thought we are going to talk today about things we usually don't talk in our teaching and our studio here, but are very important and fundamental to our practice. We set up around 10 years ago, right about the time where we started teaching here. First Nick got a sort of a place, and then I followed him after a year. So we've been doing sort of this version of what we're doing for about 10 years. This is our office in London, in Bow. We are in a collection of buildings which included an ex-nunnery and some very early or sort of examples of industrial architecture in London and some sort of 1930s, 1940s buildings, really nice. That's the ArcelorMittal thing. So we're close to the Olympic Park. So he's lovely. We have a nice courtyard where we share and have lunches when the weather is nice. It's a project we did for a client called Bow Arts. They are one of the largest art studio providers in London. They have about 500 studios in London. And in this location, they have about 150. So in 2013, we've won a competition to do their new offices and new gallery space. So we came up with this idea of consolidating the courtyard and making something that could be used throughout the year. These are the offices. A new connection to the park, which is in the back, which didn't exist. So there's a new relationship there we wanted to frame. And creating this sort of environment that could be used for different things. So it's a very active space. That's the nunnery gallery, which is at the ground floor of what used to be the teaching classrooms of the nunnery. We found sort of new windows and opened things in order to get light, and it was an interesting project. And that's the common area used as an exhibition space, in this case for our work and events. We're very lucky to have a space where we can do models and experiment with techniques and stuff. After about 2 or 3 years being there, we sort of got overwhelmed by the things that we're making, so we kind of expanded, and now we have space for models of different scales that we make and build. So today we talked. We thought we were going to talk about this kind of relationship between art and architecture, which for us is very important. Not only we work surrounded by artists, but we also have been, since we started the practice, very sort of deeply related to people that perhaps operate around or generate or do art or think about art, and he's been a great influence in our work at different scales. This is Donald Judd's studio in Soho, in New York, and now it's the Donald Judd Foundation. And it's an interesting thing because in the 60s in New York, there were a lot of things happening in the world. In the 60s, but in New York, there was this sort of renewed energy about the city and in a way artists sort of inhabiting new spaces. It was a tough economic time, so a lot of the space in the city were not used or unused, so a lot of people were out of work. But also there was this opportunity to then inhabit spaces. So Donald Judd moved into this building. It was a garment production building, and he lived there and then produced some of his work. And this is how it is now. But some of these pieces are prototypes of his aluminum pieces that he did in the 60s. One of them is piece number 164, or whatever it is, and he did a lot of these pieces. But it was when the art started to become sort of conceptualized rather than produce a piece itself. They would think about the piece and then get it made somewhere else, or the pieces, in this case, the sheets of aluminium were made somewhere else, and then they were brought to the studio, they were poured up, and then assembled there. And what happened is that once they were assembled, they were so big and so heavy that they couldn't be moved. So they remained there until now. But what happened there is that there was this sort of new relationship with the space, with the building, that was generated because of that. And then people had to go to the studio and to look at the pieces because they couldn't go and look at them in a gallery or anywhere else. So the studio becomes a gallery. A found space, in this case, becomes the studio and the gallery. But then there's this sort of new relationship that happens with the building because of the scale of these things, the materiality, and the presence. So these objects, and what Donald Judd was exploring here is this sculptural pieces were of a scale that they weren't furniture. They were too big to be furniture. But they were too small to be spaces in themselves. So you had to move around them. You had to, in order to see them, to perceive them, you had to make an effort to do it. But by doing so, you need to move around space in the same way. So in this case, it was what the art historian Hal Foster called this tension between architecture and art. That then no longer a space becomes a gallery space or a space of exhibition becomes just a passive thing, but it's intrinsically understood or has to be understood with the piece itself. So the space and the piece become one. So through these themes, we're going to talk about 4 little stories of interlude projects that we've done to illustrate some of these ideas about this tension between reciprocity between art and architecture. First problem is on the skin, and this is, it talks about the fact that this tension on reciprocity doesn't only happen in space or in a formal way, but it also happens at institutional level, in a way, in a democratic level, in a financial level, about how these institutions relate to art. This being institutions that exhibit art or that are related to that. So one of our most important influences is an artist. His name was Michael Asher. He's an American artist, or was an American artist, that worked mainly in California, taught most of his life. And he produced very little in terms of work itself. And that's why we think it's one of the most influential but least known artists. This is one of his works in the 70s that he did at the Lisson Gallery in London. And the intervention was to make this, to separate the walls from the floor. was it. It was just sort of creating this, again, this tension between, you know, the space that surrounds or that contains the space and the floor itself. So arguably creating this concept of the shadow gap back then, and nowadays most galleries and spaces have this shadow gap almost as a given. We've been given that briefing in some gallery spaces we've done. And then the Claire Copley Gallery in sort of a pixelated image in Los Angeles. His intervention was this is this gallery space and that's the office space, so he took the wall away from the gallery space, or from the office space, revealing the sort of the back of house as it be. And then he just moved that. There were two rails, lighting rails, and he created one. So when the visitors came into the gallery, they saw this space with some people working in the background. They didn't know what to do. Some of them left, some of them came and asked people what they were doing, and they started sort of this relationship. And what he was talking about is creating this new relationship that before didn't exist between the people that actually do the exhibition, think about the exhibition, curate the exhibition, and the actual exhibition space. So tearing this sort of barrier between them and creating a new relationship between them. Or in San Francisco, in the Museum of Art, sorry, in Santa Monica, in the Museum of Art, but then in the space, he basically mapped all the exhibitions up until that point and did the partitions of all those exhibitions and erected them in skeletons of plasterboard partitions without a plasterboard. So he made a commentary in a way, of the history of the organization up until that point. That for them was an important key point at that point. So when the relationship with that, with some of the clients that we work with, some of them is art, in this case Beaux Arts that we're going to talk about. We go through a process of inquiry. We try to get under the skin of the organization and really try to understand how they operate before even coming up with a strategy or a project.
Not dissimilar from the base we teach. Yes. Picking up on that, the first project we want to talk about in this context is a project we did with the Beaux Arts Trust in Barking, eastern fringes of London. So our relationship that Eric mentioned with the Beaux Arts Trust over time has sort of evolved from it as being a client to architect relationship to very, very close collaboration on a number of projects. And this was the first ones we did after the actual studio building, after the offices that we did with them. It's important because it sort of represents the way that Beaux Arts have had to adapt as an organization to the changing market, the changing situation in terms of the availability of spaces in the city. They're being pushed out. The classic case of what they would have been looking at and inhabiting in terms of spaces are these old warehouses, old industrial structures, basically cheap space that can be turned into studios very, very easily. It's all about affordability, about building a studio for £8 a square foot or something like that. So, as things have moved on and the space become less and less available, as I said, they're having to move out to fringes. They're having to go as far as Manchester now and to parts of the country where they didn't think they would have to go. Equally, the types of spaces are changing to the way that they're having to adapt to a different type of building that they have to occupy. What you get is a situation like this, where there's a recent development, a housing scheme with a ground floor space that was designed for retail, which was then handed over to an organization like Beaux Arts on a 5 or 10-year lease to provide what is generally described as a mean by use, and to occupy these spaces and activate the public realm around the project. So in this case, what has been happening over the last decades is normally we have these buildings that have a ground floor use that is designated as retail or commercial, and what the developer does, it does board it up and leave it for 2 years and then try to enforce a change of use because they can't officially rent it because it's not sellable basically. So that's where organizations like Beaux Arts come in and taking on this project. There's a series of challenges obviously because it's a very different kind of space to what they're used to and what the working practices have so far sort of been leading them towards. They having to deal with a glazed front. It's obviously, as I said, designed for a designed for retail mainly. So you have a basic shop front and big glazed perimeter of the building that obviously provides some really interesting opportunities for artists in there. But at the same time, there's a sort of inherent clash in the setup here that it doesn't really give any privacy as a practitioner in the art or creative producers. So what I had to experience in the past before we started this project was that they took on some retail spaces and what the artists did, they put newspaper or cardboard on the windows to get the privacy. And that's the point where I started off with us saying we need to come up with a different solution here. And so what we did, we sort of interrogated almost the way they work and the way they sort of traditionally would have been fitting out these spaces, and then developed a system that could be used in these environments, but also adapted to different ones, almost coming up with a modular sort of kit of parts for them that they could deploy in different types of spaces, very much with the idea of a retail frontage in mind, obviously, but doing more than just that. So it was taking the components inspired by what Eric was saying in terms of the work of Michael Asher, and this sort of system of the bare bones of kit basically, and they would normally do partitions. There would be timber stud or metal stud and clad with plasterboard. So we stripped that apart and said what are actually the components you need and what does the system have to do. In this case, it needs to provide separation between spaces, provide smaller rooms within the bigger entity, but also somehow deal with the threshold between the inside and outside. And yeah, the aspect of privacy is very important, but also the opportunity here that the system is like a very basic shelving system, almost that can be clad on both sides, that can be adapted to become a display system. It can be a way of representing or showcasing the work to the outside, but it also gives it a level of privacy by just providing a screen. So the project, as you can see, has got quite a significant sort of core that comes down in terms of the surface area, but the majority perimeter is retail spaces. They were then subdivided up into smaller sort of, artist studios, and components apart from the sort of system that we deployed on the perimeter and as a way of partitioning spaces also included lighting. Again, we need to look at the cost of things. We needed to look at the bare bones of the system, and we came up with a principle of deploying lighting in a way that is very flexible. So there are all exposed surfaces. You almost clip on the lights onto a central distribution system, which can then be adapted to suit these spaces, and it's actually very, very affordable. You see some of the spaces inhabited. The project huge success in terms of the way the people are responding to it, and you see the artists actually modifying these systems, and that's actually encouraged. It's not something we prevent. It's actually something that's intended. So they all make their own versions of it. They make their own sort of cladding panels that they add in bits, and they're using it shelving, as I said, as a display. And just a few sort of moments which we enjoy. And that's the project now from the outside. So there's a theme that you can read through when you come across the building. At the same time, it sort of gives the sort of slight level of screening that needed to give the privacy. And we had a visitor last year to see the project and speaking to one of the artists there, and she's not just smiling here, she's actually very happy that space. In a way, so what I was talking about earlier was maybe the significance of these type of spaces that become available, but also along with that, and in terms of the recognition of the fact that these spaces are becoming a problem if they're not rented, if they're not used in the way they're intended to, has created a bit of a game shift also in the way the local authorities are looking at it and are now actively pursuing tenants like the Boards Trust to become a very important part of the mechanism of regeneration. So that project embarking then triggered a commission in this case on a much bigger scale for us, but also for the Boards Trust, who then handed over this pilot project the documents to manage and run for 10 years. All these ground spaces that you see illuminated. It's a housing scheme by Delvendahl Architects, and it's part of a rollout of about 1,800 housing units in the area in Brooklyn. One of the particular challenges here is the fact that you have a very remote location, despite all the advertising and all the marketing brochures who tell you that you can be in the city in 15 minutes. send people there for all providing facilities. You can't expect people to form their own sort of community. You need to think about the timelines, you think about the challenges that are involved in moving to space. And that's where Arts as an organization come in, because they're not just managing space, they're not just providing spaces for artists, they're also running a cafe there, they're running a series of flexible spaces that are, there's a yoga studio, there's a pop-up gallery. So there's activity during the day that is managed by them as an organization. And what we did here is we deployed a similar system at a slightly more complex and more sort of larger scale, I guess, because some of these spaces are double height. So the system actually then becomes bioscape as well as a shelving system. And this is the pop-up restaurant instead. So it seems to be working very well. And the location is fantastic in terms of the waterfront, but like I said, it is a place that you have to first get to. That project then again triggered another project that we got involved in. The actual developer of this housing project, Housing Association, called Nottingham Genesis, then approached us to take part in a competition for a site next door, which is sort of the fringe of this development, which is facing the River Thames. And they were looking at potentially getting a site for a 7 to 10 year lease, because it's limited to an infrastructure project in the future. So the challenge here was to come up with a scheme that is providing temporary housing because of the limited lifespan of this site in a way for the client, but also tapping into a very important need that is out there. Lots of people talk about the housing crisis at the moment in London and elsewhere. Maybe you're not aware of is the amount of people actually homeless by definition, that actually don't actually have a place. The local authorities are putting them up in bed and breakfast and other sort of places for a horrendous sum of money. It's costing them millions every week. And so there's a dire need for temporary accommodation. And the challenge of this project was to come up with a principle that sort of established a location here that doesn't feel like a temporary accommodation, doesn't feel like a refugee camp. At the same time, need to be deployable and removed after 7 years of this. So we then did a research and found a code that relates to water schemes. It's quite well published, that talks about it being a permanent project in a temporary condition. So it's not just about a temporary construction. We looked into modular. This whole project is based on a modular system, but also a modular organizational diagram. And the actual individual units had to be quite affordable and obviously designed to a size and a unit dimension that can be put in a lorry. We have a series of components to the system that you see the individual units are made from a couple of sort of like porter cabin type units. But there's a very important element in here which we're adding to it, which is what we call the deck. It's linking all these spaces up and providing communal areas for people to interact, for people to actually spend time in, because the size of these units are obviously at the bare minimum, and the whole idea is to create not just communal space in here, but there's two very important themes here, which is the communal gardens and the yard. And the yard caters for the part that actually links back to the scheme I showed you before, which is about, that's one more slide about talking about the modularity of the system. So one of the themes is the yard, spaces that cater for live work units, which came out of the exercise that we did for the Barnstrasse and the Royal Wharf. And the idea that live work units can actually really make a big difference in these schemes. So it's the whole idea of the daytime, nighttime activity, and how these interact with the housing component. And on the other side of the scheme, we have these communal gardens facing south, whereas the yards are facing north, and are sort of the service access to the scheme.
So the curator, we did this. One of our early projects is this house for a curator, a very well-known curator. His name is Jessica Morgan, and there was this idea of the rear window, like in Hitchcock's rear window, but we have two big windows, and one of them is the sort of public space in the ground floor, the dining area, the kitchen, and then the study. where they have all the books, and so there's two sort of window areas, and then this sort of hidden access to the top behind this door with an orange staircase. It was a very sort of fun project to do. But then we kept working with Jessica, and then she was the curator of the one of the biennales in Gwangju, art biennales in Korea. There's about 5 very important biennales in the art calendar, and this is one of them. And we worked with, and there was this idea of moving on from the sort of white wall approach of the exhibition design and do something much more interesting and powerful in terms of theme and visually. So we worked with El Ultimo Grito, who are artists and designers based in London, to come up with a sort of coherent theme around the theme of the Biennale, which was burning down the house, which alluded to this massacre in the 1980s in Korea, with people manifesting against the dictatorship, and coincided with that year. And but also that from destruction comes renewal, and the Talking Head song, and blah blah blah. So from there we developed this sort of graphic, very bold graphic theme of something burning and pixelated that worked at different scales, and then we covered sort of the walls of the exhibition with this sort of wallpaper that then sort of was like a mise en scène of the exhibition throughout different themes, throughout different artists, and it's sort of subtle changes in color and pixelation. We did this sort of Donald Judd inspired furniture as well throughout the exhibition, and it was one of the things that people commented more about, you know, when visiting, apart from, you know, obviously the theme and the artwork, but the fact that there was this very specific memory of that particular exhibition, because there was something that was following you throughout the spaces. So we did another exhibition at the Tate Modern with Jessica, which was The World Goes Pop, which was very exploring that idea more. But a more recent project with her, then she got appointed as director of DIA, which is an art foundation, very well known art foundation in New York. And she called us to see if we can help her with this project in Chelsea, which was about in Chelsea, New York, and in the sort of lower west side. And so it's close to where the docks used to be. So that was buzzing with activity at some point in the early 19th century. I think the Titanic sort of was arrived originally and then left from somewhere there, and this is the High Line there. So now it has, so that area has changed quite a lot, and Badia in the 60s was one of these organizations that was sort of funding artists and funding them in these found spaces, and they've been in this area since the beginning, and then now they've moved to other places as well. But their offices are up there, and they had sort of recently acquired some of the spaces next door, and so we looked at a feasibility study for them to see how to sort of bring in all these spaces, their offices, and then create a program or sort of a series of exhibition and other programs that they have in Chelsea. So there's this renewed energy that having been around in other spaces, now they wanted to sort of go back to Chelsea in a way. And so we looked at the project from the component level, so from you know, how do you access the door, to how do you access the spaces, to the buildings themselves at the urban level, and this idea of what Chelsea was at the urban level. And in a way, this sort of idea of the tension between art and space and built space was very important for how Dia thought about exhibiting art. So this is the Earth Room by Walter de Maria, which is in one of these apartments in New York. And this is an artwork that has been there since the 70s, and it has been there constantly. So it was meant to be a temporary exhibition, but decades on, you can still visit it, and it's pretty much there. It has been maintained, changed, but it's still there. And then Beacon. So at some point, Chelsea bought the Nabisco factory, the biscuits, and that's where sort of part of the High Line went to. So the High Line was this sort of freight, sort of goods railway that came into the city and up along the river, and it went all the way to Beacon, which is a town where this where the Nabisco factory was. So they converted it into art spaces, and again Walter de Maria's piece with this sort of relationship with the building itself, which was very important. And again, you can't be understood one without the other. Dan Flavin in the basement of the building, just like a really strong sort of relationship with the building itself. And so what our work involved is a series of very discrete interventions, or almost looking at how to change the space, but very, very discreetly. So we started sort of speculating about how we could create adjacencies and openings, and what would that make. So we discovered sort of spaces in between the buildings, and again looked at whether we could create sort of new routes and access to different spaces, but really keeping the fabric of the building and working with it, working with large-scale models to investigate light conditions and then openings along the three spaces, and seeing this sort of, again, adjacencies and how much you can start to erode space without compromising it. So those are the three buildings, around about sort of, early 20th century. First sort of industrial buildings, a concrete building, a concrete frame building, one of the first ones, and then starting to these two facades. That was, as you can see, marble works, and that was a garage. And these facades, when we investigated them, they're literally crumbling down. So at some point they're going to collapse. So they're sort of being held by almost nothing. So they had to be changed. So we looked at how to sort of integrate sort of the facades and make again a very subtle but quite sort of powerful intervention into the buildings. Very trying to work with the materials. Very trying to create sort of there was a relationship between the three buildings, and then this idea that going back to what we did in Bow, that the galleries is almost a shop front for art, so it's not completely enclosed, it's not behind doors or walls, but actually you can see it. One very important thing for Dia is this idea of the exhibitions being long-term exhibitions, so they don't have this idea of the 3-month exhibition and then another one and then another one that needs to work with sort of the market nowadays. So they do exhibitions that are 9 months long. So the work of art can be seen throughout the year in different lights, in different lighting conditions. And also it's very important for them that a lot of these exhibitions are with natural light. So there's very little artificial light. So all the paraphernalia that you see of the usual sort of gallery of lighting racks and air conditioning and all that doesn't exist here. That doesn't, you don't see any lighting here, or any sort of nothing that could go against the kind of the grain of the space itself, or the found space of the building. That is very important. It has to have certain flexibility. It has to work with in a lot of scenarios, and at some point it does have to have artificial light. So how do you integrate lighting and different lighting conditions to that? So we had to be sort of clever about hiding the lights and then moving furniture away so they could be used in different ways, creating new openings there, making some new openings to bring in natural light as well. But again, all the lighting is hidden and integrated, and or maybe very discreetly shown. So and again, this idea that that you could see walking from the street, then you could see the exhibition inside an opening sort of breaking these barriers between the gallery and the street. We had to talk very quickly about found spaces.
Okay, found spaces is one of the recurring themes that we've talked about coming across in this. So hence the title. Found spaces, but not only just working in a city like London, but elsewhere. Found spaces, I guess, relates to many things we do. And this is a project I wanted to show you that is actually Oxford. It's a found space that is a set of existing Victorian buildings in the central part of Oxford, in a conservation area called Jericho, next to Worcester College. Our clients were lucky to find these two buildings, and there's two parts of the semi-detached that were for sale, and they bought them both. We decided to combine them and then approached us to see if we can make a project out of it. And so one of the striking things about this building, obviously, came up very early on, is the symmetry, and when you look at it as two parts of a semi, and how to deal with that. And obviously, there's a very important reference here in terms of symmetry and then some other aspects of the scheme, the elevated ground floor and the idea of the relationship with the garden, and we explored a lot as to how we could manage that transition between the living space and the garden, and how to actually make that access possible. Went through a number of iterations. This is an early sort of part of the scheme. At the end, we ended up with an elevated, sort of almost like a loggia type arrangement, where you ended up going front facade, and we ended up going out through the staircase here into the garden, and once the upper floor, so the living area, you have this massive screen that you can open up, so it's a fully glazed screen that you can sort of slide across the tina glass, that sort of makes you feel like you're sitting in the garden, even though you're 1.5 to 2 meters up from the garden. So coming back to the idea of symmetry and how to deal with the building, the client was very keen to instill an idea of horizontal living as opposed to the more vertical principles behind Victorian houses, and sort of the cramped nature, what they were struggling with these two buildings. There used to be also student bedsitters, very small spaces that are sort of cramped into the building, and so we ended up with a very different approach to the building. What you see here is the very key feature of the building. We decided to insert a staircase, a central staircase that gives you access to all the 3 floors for the family, but that was perpendicular to the grain of the structure of the building, that being the central dividing wall of the project. Take you through, you can see the staircase coming up here. You take a series of steps up from the street up to the raised ground floor. This is all open plan, the family space, the kitchen, dining, living areas, the area that we call the snug, which can be closed off if necessary with a piano, a bit of a playroom. As you come up, this is the main floor where you have all the bedrooms for family, and the staircase continues up into the top level, which is the parents' area, so the attic basically. There's also the lower ground floor, which is rented out at the moment, so like a granny flat. I'm a photographer, and she documented every step of the process, and you can just get a sense here of the amount of intervention this was. So despite the idea of going against the grain almost and deploying a much more horizontal model, organizing the spaces, and you can see the necessary changes here to the structure. So we're still frame to hold the building together. We still kept very significant parts of the central spine wall throughout the project. The dining area looking out into the garden. This is the staircase. It's a double-height space, and it's quite a key part of the building, which they call the planning officer that we had to deal for quite a long period, called them the outriggers that we extended out. So one important thing to say about the project, because it's in a conservation area, planners would play any changes to the front of the building, but we initially achieved some liberty in the way we dealt with the back of the building, and we made quite some drastic changes to that. So all this is new. So this in a way is even it's 2.5 meters further out than it used to be, but it's following the same shape. Basically, it's just extruding out the building. It gave us a chance to have this double-height space and a connection to the front and making out the garden. All brickwork. This project was all about craftsmanship and working and a much more detailed level than we would normally continue to do so, because we had a client who was very much into the idea, and so very engaged in the process. And a lot of staircase, which is all clad in a very affordable structural plywood that was then stained to achieve that effect, which is a very different sort of reading. And this is the moment when you come onto the first floor and into the sort of bedroom area. These doors will pull back to open up the space, or as close as it becomes just a central corridor. And then you continue up on the top level, just area where the parents have their sort of home office and the master bedroom. That staircase that was shown before to the garden is a key feature of the building, not just because it's a daily space from above, very dramatic, but it's also not just all handcrafted as a piece, the hanger that was made by hand as well. This is the view that was simulated with the model before. But not only just in an urban environment or in a city environment, but also in a very different context here. This is a project we've been working on since 2014 for a client who owns a significant estate in West Berkshire, an area of outstanding beauty, so almost wetland type character. It's a sort of network of waterways and ponds that used to be used for watercress farming, and it was contaminated, and the client has spent decades cleaning it up and repairing what had been left in a sort of very well-maintained state. Network of buildings, or a group of buildings that...
it's not Photoshop, by the way. The song is working there. It's Photoshop.
Yeah. There's actually a spring underneath here, apparently, so it's not just a point, but it's actually there's a spring underneath. So this is important because that's the building the client asked us to extend. It's kind of a Victorian folly, it's more Tudor. It was the more representation of part of the farm. But it's important to understand the context as a series of buildings that have been adapted and changed and demolished and rebuilt over time. So the client spent a lot of time doing that and got us involved, as I said, in the extension of this building in the foreground. There's a storage shot in the 1940s. It shows how it was already extended at that time over from the original state, presumed as the founders exhibit there. So this is our project. But with the same sort of process, we also got involved in sort of coming up with a master plan diagram for the whole development. They've been rebuilding all these parts. That's the existing building we're talking into for extension. That's actually a barn that the client bought somewhere else from the 17th century barn that was relocated, flat packed and relocated here. However, there is a precedent of a barn that historically, you can see from these images, 50 feet city, something about buying historic structure, basically. That's how it looks like. Quite undertaking. This is far from the area, important reference for us in developing the design for this project. As you can see, this is the existing farmhouse, Victorian folly, and this is the extension. So the challenges we had here are the conditions we encountered was how to deal with an existing building like that, which is quite a character. How to also make the most of the location and the beauty of the area, the waterways, the ponds. So we came up with the principle of a floating pavilion that sort of parts travels over the water. The stage of the construction. There's basically three components to design of the building. It's precast concrete, as you can see here. It's framing the whole view to the south. Highly refined sort of detail in terms of the section of these, and you see that the point is going to happen based on this image. This construction was very complicated because of the water levels on the site, and apart from the precast concrete, there's a very important feature of the building is the back wall, which is a flint wall, which is a traditional method that we sort of took as a reference from the existing site. The existing farmhouse has this ground floor band of flintstone cladding. There's a oak truss roof that has a very distinct shape. Obviously, the south-facing elevation is higher to build maximum roof height, and to address the best view of the site. it's a very different scale. We're working on the last couple of years. It's looking at, again, you could say it's a farm space because it's in this industrial estate in South London. We got commissioned to lost the time. Okay, anyway, this project is a mixed-use project. When people talk about mixed use these days, it's very often it's a residential-led scheme, and there's some commercial aspect in there somewhere. In this case, the project is trying to achieve something slightly different in terms of embedding light industrial use into the project, which is retaining the use on the site. It's an industrial estate that's all landlocked in a residential area in South London. And so it's a podium structure that we developed that houses all the industrial spaces, and sort of top with 4 volumes that sort of house the residential above. The idea of a band that sort of explains the use of the industrial, highlights the industrial part of the project, and figuring out the methodology, I guess, here that we are working on to come up with a solution that allows these quite disparate and quite different uses to cohabit with the site. So there's references to Victorian brick architecture and industrial architecture in particular, and these 4 volumes here have been sculpted to optimize daylight sunlight aspects and to retain views of the site. It's quite a complex sort of site, but it's the sort of type of scale that we're looking at. In this case, in almost an urban scale, the theme we're exploring. Brings us to the last part of the talk.
So nearly there. So I guess it's just a series of projects that we've done recently that revolve around sort of themes of topical in terms of our political environment. But this was one of the this was a proposal for one of the RBA. They made interventions into the building every year, and we came up with this idea of, and it was called, the theme was Beyond Borders. So this is the geological map of Europe, and it's funny how Great Britain just disappears there in the geology of Europe, and it's almost like one mass. It's really hard to tell what it is. So we wanted to go sort of beyond the political borders and these sort of the current sort of polarization and division of society that we've been looking at in various countries, and looking at the sort of what makes sort of buildings, and what do we build from, and what was there even before everything, so millions of years ago. So we come up with the idea was to make a catalogue of samples of stones and aggregates, and use them as aggregates to make this sort of concrete cores that then could be cast in different sizes and form this sort of taxonomy of the earth, and creating this sort of object that was very robust and that could be put outside and almost became like something that people could sort of engage and play with. And then more recently, we were commissioned in Mexico to do an itinerant library that at the moment the current government is pretty much eroding resources for the dissemination of culture, of research, or any sort of educational institutions. So this idea of putting books in different places to disseminate design was the idea behind this. The designers have this, it was a design fair, sorry. So they invited us to come up with, to design the actual library. So we decided to do a library without bookshelves, so something that was made out of components that could be put sort of that were small enough that could be put in different places, but the books were almost placed like in a house. You know, they could be in seats, they could be in a table, they could be everywhere. And it's made out of CNC technology because it was sponsored by this company that does sustainable components and laminate components. So this idea of it's very good, but so that was the library. Several it means archive. So this archive would grow over time and it would be sort of added to over time. And this was exhibited as in a design fair, but then the idea is that it goes beyond that. And our proposal for the British Pavilion for the Architecture Biennale, where we were thinking about this dichotomy of the yes and no, the stay or leave. And our proposal was that the visitor would have to choose an entrance, you know, and divide the whole building into two halves. And then depending on which half you chose, then you ended up having an experience of the exhibition that was very different from the other. But there were points of intersection of these sort of revolving doors, glass revolving doors. You would see glimpses of the other world, of people going through, but you never could cross. So as they rotate, they would give pass to one or the other, but never together. So you get a glimpse of the other, but not. But you will never know what the other world is about. And we unfortunately didn't win our proposal, but fortunately, very recently, through working with Ralph Ruger, the director of the Hayward, where we had done some work, he invited us to work with him in the Art Biennale this year. So we're doing all the exhibition design for the Biennale. And the theme is May You Live in Interesting Times. And it's funny how this, sort of when it was announced, in this case in Freeze, the idea is tackling the age of fake news and digital dissemination of information and all these things, and then other things, in further news, Brexit vote to support arts, New York Libraries Culture Pass, unlock museums, raising Paris back artists' housing, winds rules, all these things happening at that point, which was July last year. And I guess Ralph's idea is that through art we're going to sort of talk about these things. And so we're working in these amazing spaces, which is the Arsenale in Venice, which is where at the peak of where all the sort of ships in Venice were built, and at the peak in the 16th century they were building one ship per a day or something like that. So it was the largest industrial production plant in history up until that point, before the Industrial Revolution. So it was very impressive compounds, and that's folks. I mean, we've been given access to all the spaces that normally you wouldn't go. So that's the top mezzanine, which is there. This is what's called the corderie, where they built the ropes for the ships. So it's a very long building, 360 meters long, and then these very robust 1.5-meter columns, brick columns, amazing, which don't carry anything. So there's a mezzanine, there's nothing up there. So all the roof structure at some point was lifted up, and the columns remained there. And that's our 3.5-meter model that we have that we've been working on, and working with the curators and all that. We have all these tags, and that's the way you sort of work out an exhibition. And I guess this is thematic, and one of the themes. I mean, I only saw that the other day. There was high anxiety, and I guess that reflects sort of the times now. So we can't show you a lot of things because this is what we're working with, and it's highly secretive. But you'll see it soon. It opens in May. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric and Nikolai, for the talk. I think we can just straight away jump into questions. Any questions?
Ask one. So for the temporary housing project, what was the feedback from? Sorry.
Good question.
For the what?
We won this competition, but as it happens in the world of architecture, sometimes that doesn't really lead to the project. The project is on hold at the moment. I don't know when or where it's going to go. It's very political, it's very difficult, but the site is very complex.
the reason what I'm asking is because I suspect that it's probably quite different from what they imagined. Would that be a fair thing to say, or was that?
Probably, yes. I guess we took them on a bit of a journey with that proposal, yeah. But they really liked it. And the GLA are really interested in it. So we may get another look. We'll see.
Any other questions? Okay, it seems as if all is clear.
Well, that was easy.
Okay, so thank you for accepting our invitation and for an interesting talk. So thank you for coming as well. So next week, same time, same place.
Okay.